Rising interest rates present an opportunity for savers to earn more yield on the cash they have sitting waiting for their next investment. And today I'm going to tell you where you can get more yield on your money than you would in the country where you live. And so if you live in the United States, I've seen online savings rates get up to 1.5%, 2%. In other countries, it is lower than that depending on what currency you're in. And so if you want to earn more money on your term deposit, on your cash that you're just sitting waiting to deploy, waiting for the next opportunity, waiting for the next business, piece of real estate, whatever it is that you want to buy, whether you're dollar cost averaging and you've just got too much cash that you're looking to dollar cost average in, these are reasons why you would want to be able to earn more money. On top of that, I have some entrepreneur clients who believe that they're much better entrepreneurs and investors, and they say, listen, Andrew, I like your lifetime emergency fund concept. I'm going to have $5 million in the bank, and so they can keep their money now in strong banks offshore, and rather than making 1% that they were making not that long ago, they can get up to 3, 4, 5% today, and that means their lifetime emergency fund is paying them enough money that depending on where they live, they could just live out the rest of their days. And so if it's your first time here, I'm Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consulting firm that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. You can learn everything that means at nomadcapitalist.com, but it certainly doesn't mean keeping your money in just one country. We do things legally. If you need to report offshore bank accounts, you definitely want to do that and stay in compliance with the law, but we believe in diversification, and that diversification sometimes means higher interest rates. So let's cover that. I bank all around the world and have done so for years. And one of the reasons why we've told you to do that is to have higher interest rates. You can do that in foreign currencies. One of the things I've been telling you for a while now is the Armenian Dram was one of the emerging world currencies that kept up with the US dollar. It was about 480 to the US dollar for 6 years. And then earlier this year it broke out, presumably because of people coming from Russia into Armenia and bringing currency with them. And so now it is up about 15 to 20% against the dollar in just a matter of months. And you can still earn 9, even 10% on those Dram. And so for the longest time, you could have looked at it as kind of a substitute for the dollar in the sense of it had this multi-year track record of basically paralleling the dollar. And so in Armenia, you would make 4.5%, sometimes 5% on dollars, but you could make up to 10% on Dram. And if it kept the same, all you would pay is the round-trip currency conversion cost. And so if you were in it for the long term, that would certainly be negated by the much greater interest rate. So now those Drams are a lot more expensive to buy. Same thing with the Georgian Lari. I bought Georgian Lari at 3.5, now it's 2.7-ish to the dollar, and all along the way made about 12%. So some of those strategies may not be as interesting anymore. The US dollar is very strong, and so if you can find currencies that have been beaten up, currencies in Asia, the euro, the challenge is you're not really going to get as much of a yield there. And so would you rather earn 2% in Malaysian ringgit or 3, 4, 5% in US dollars? Unless you're living in Malaysia or plan to live in Malaysia or plan to buy something in Malaysia and think the currency is going to get worse, then you wouldn't want to do that. And so let's talk about where you can get good US dollar rates on your savings. Most of these are going to be term deposits. Every once in a while I see a bank where they say, hey, just put your money in and we'll just pay you to keep it there for a short period of time. But I'll tell you, one of the strongest places where you can get a good yield on dollars today is actually in Singapore. Singapore has the big 3 banks, and if you have a connection with some of the non-big 3 banks, then you can sometimes open an account there. So for example, if you've got an account with one of the international banks in another jurisdiction, you can often come and open an account with them in Singapore. And so I got a teaser rate from one of my banks. We don't mention specific bank names ever since I got a nasty letter from a bank saying, we're tired of you recommending us. Stop saying how great we are. We're sick of you. So I no longer recommend particular banks by name, but you can look up the big 3 banks in Singapore. You can open an account there. Generally, as a foreigner, if you have no connection to Singapore, you're looking at a low to mid 6-figure deposit. And if you're an American, you can do it only as a cash account, generally no investments. But I got from one of my banks, which is not in the big 3, a teaser offer, which would have put me at close to 4% if I were to bring in 50,000 US dollars in what they call fresh funds. They're big in Asia on fresh funds. Bring in more money, bring in more money, bring in more money that's not already in our bank, and we will give you a bonus rate. Generally, the deals where it's like, oh, buy an insurance policy, buy a mutual fund, those are generally suckers' bets. You could have gotten the yield even higher if you would have done that. But I think I could have gotten up to about 3.9% in US dollars on a teaser rate for like 6 months. Otherwise, the rate was about 2.9%. And that's what you're looking at with some of the big 3 banks. You can put in any amount, generally, of US dollars and get close to about 3%. Now, you can get that same interest rate if you want to be diversified on Singapore government debt. So like Singapore savings bonds, for example, are paying over a 10-year basis about 3%. If you think the Singapore dollar is going to strengthen, that's a pretty liquid deal. You can come in and out at any time during the 10 years. But if you want US dollars, those big three banks are offering some of the best yields, and they are, all three of those banks, in like the top 20 strongest banks in the world. Let me give you an example of who might want to do this, okay? Someone who comes to Nomad Capitalist and says, hey, I've got $2 million sitting around liquid, and I want to deploy that offshore. I already have rental properties in my country, I have stocks in my country, I have whatever, but I've got $2 million and I want to deploy that. You're generally not going to just go and put all that money into, with our friends at Investation, or you're not going to buy a property in Georgia, or you're not going to put it all into, one bank account somewhere else. And so if you want to dip your toe in, let's say you want to buy one property somewhere, the property costs $200,000. You put $1 million or $2 million in this case into the bank account in Singapore. It's pretty solid, stronger than any U.S. bank, stronger than pretty much any bank that you've probably ever worked with in terms of the people who rate these banks. You move your $2 million in, you spend the $200,000 on the investment. The investment goes well. 3 months later, you move another $200,000 out, something like that. Okay, and over the next 12 to 24 months, you're going to move that money out, and so you can basically ladder your term deposits to where you're going to have a certain amount for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and you're going to get rates up to about 3%. You could also do where, hey, I'm just going to start diversifying my money, dollar cost averaging, into stocks or bonds, whatever, overseas. If you're not an American, you can open up an account at a bank in Singapore, and you can get access to trading numerous different equity markets. You can get access to mutual funds. You can access to lots of different investments. But again, do you want to just take $2 million and just put that all in a REIT, or put that all in an equity fund, or put that all in anything? Yeah, probably not, right? I'm not here to give you investment advice, but you probably don't want to just take $2 million and put it all in red. And so you have a strategy, $500,000 a quarter. And again, you can just ladder your term deposits to achieve that, and you have your money in a stronger bank than it's sitting in now. Because again, unless your bank is one of the 15 strongest banks in the world, you're doing better in Singapore, and they're paying you pretty good interest rates on your US dollars. If you want to hold money in other currencies, you're really not going to be in luck, right? The euro, not really paying a lot. So that's what you can do. And Singapore is a good place because it's a more accessible retail version for investors than, let's say, Switzerland or Liechtenstein. Lower fees, a little bit easier to get in the door. You do need to go there to open an account, and to go there, you generally need to be vaccinated at the moment. And so that's something that you can look at doing. You can get rates, again, up to potentially as high as close to 4%, I have seen, but advertised rates up to about 3%. Let's talk about other countries we've talked about where you might want to park lesser amounts of cash. It's up to you how much money you want to put in the banks. But let's talk about Georgia. We have talked historically about TBC Bank. Not as easy to open an account now, or at least keep one open. I've had an account there for many, many years, but they've become more stringent than some of the other larger Georgian banks. And so you can get higher rates at some of the smaller banks that may have, relatively wealthy ownership. So there's a bank that's owned by, some big folks in the UAE, for example. You might think, okay, that's relatively decent. Or just as we've talked about in Cambodia, there's a bank that's owned by a big Korean bank. And so people make fun of Cambodia. They probably don't really know the details, but backed up by a strong Korean bank, or backed up by someone in the UAE, I mean, there's probably more significance there than just some little small local bank. But if you're willing to go to the smaller local banks, you can get into the twos in Georgia. So not even as high as Singapore. If you're looking at the couple of big banks, you're going to potentially be under 2. So I saw 1.95% from TBC. Not really keeping up. You can just keep your money without keeping it in there for 12 to 24 months. You can just keep your money in an online savings account in the US and make close to that. So that's not as interesting. In fact, I saw a bank in Portugal that's paying 1.85% on US dollars. So you've got stronger protections in place there. That could be the basis of getting some kind of residence permit or a golden visa in Portugal, or having access to the single euro payments area, which is convenient for folks making investments or receiving money there. And so Georgia, not as competitive anymore. If you want to get into Georgian Lari, generally speaking, not giving you investment advice, but generally speaking, the historical trend is the Georgian Lari is stronger in the summer when people are coming there and bringing foreign currency, and then it weakens. And so by that logic, the Lari at 2.7 something to the dollar, when it was 3 and 3.4 to the dollar before, may be a bit hot. And so you have to decide if you want to buy at that level. But you can get 11-12%. Generally, interest rates in Georgia are less if you're not a resident, which you can become a resident by buying property or starting a business, or a citizen. So you have to have some kind of resident status there. So Georgia really is interesting unless you're looking to get into Lari. Portugal stood out where there's a bank there. You have a few banks around Europe, but generally speaking, Europe is not the place for yield. Eastern Europe is. Georgia is still accessible. Next door in Armenia, not as accessible. However, you can use it as an opportunity to get a residence permit. Get a residence permit in Armenia. Maybe you hire some folks Maybe you invest in something in Armenia, you buy some property, use it as a chance to diversify, get a bank account. They are still paying 4, 5, and even slightly above 5%. Again, the smaller banks pay more, but I'm consistently seeing 4% right down the line for the larger European banks. So the French banks, for example, some of the larger backed banks are still at 4% for 1, 2, 3 years on your US dollar. But it's harder just to go down and open. In fact, I think generally speaking, we've said, as of a couple months ago, it is off the table. It's an option for non-residents. They really don't like non-residents at most banks. Another place where they don't like non-residents, but it's easy enough to get a residence, is in Cambodia. I think Cambodia, number one, has a currency that has effectively tracked the US dollar. The Cambodian riel, 4,040, 4,080, that's the band it's traded at ever since I've been going there, I think. And so you can get an extra percentage point or two being in that currency. May not be worth, depending on the timeline, the round trip transaction cost to convert, because there's not a lot of places you can convert dollars into riel and back. So you're basically relying on the bank's rate rather than using a service like Wise or something to do it at a discount. Even a lot of banks in Asia, you call the Singaporean banks that often for priority clients have good rates. They're generally not going to be able to do that for you into riel. And so perhaps easier to keep US dollars in Cambodia. If you get a business visa, what they call an e-visa, not an online visa, but a Series E visa, you can generally open an account if that visa is usually 12 months or longer, occasionally 6 months or longer. So what's your reason for doing business? They've made that a bit more strict, but theoretically, if you know somebody there, if you can get a letter of recommendation, if you have some kind of investment in Cambodia, you could work on getting that visa and then go and open a bank account. And they've got banks that are owned by, the Korean banks. They've got some institutions that are based around Southeast Asia. You're seeing, which is why I think Cambodia's been interesting, is the ASEAN region. The larger banks in countries like Malaysia are coming in and opening up. So you have some of the Malaysian banks going into Cambodia. They are paying a little bit lower rates than the banks that are owned by, kind of further afield places that you might not have heard about as much. But you can get, 5%, even higher on your US dollars. And again, you've got a currency that largely tracks the dollar. Ecuador has long been interesting, and they're paying rates even higher than that. You could get 6, 7% or more. Often that's going to be higher with a microfinance institution, so the traditional big banks are not going to be paying nearly that much. You can put money in and you can get a residence permit, and whether you want to live there or not, that could be either a path to citizenship or just a good thing to have in your back pocket just by keeping money in the bank. So ask yourself, $40,000, $50,000, how significant is that to me that I want to earn some yield? In this case, if you're opening with a microfinance institution, you have to go there, so you have to figure out if it's worth your while. The interest for a year may pay for your scouting trip, your flight down there, your hotel, what have you. That may be worthwhile just as a place to diversify and get some money out and be in a place that is a rather uncorrelated economy. But you can do that. You can get a residence permit by making that bank deposit, and then after that, you'll obviously just have the interest being kicked out. But it's not something that's really operated very remotely. So whereas something like Georgia is a great online banking option for running it from anywhere, Armenia is close to as good. Cambodia is not going to be as good, but it's decent. Ecuador is just not going to be at that level. Singapore, of course, is one of the best. You can run that from anywhere if you're banking with the offshore services of one of the priority banks. But Ecuador, you really have to want a connection there. The good thing is the currency of Ecuador is the US dollar, and so there's nothing odd there about US dollars. You can get that higher rate. So the question is, right, if you're looking to deploy capital somewhere else, it's going to be harder to do that from an Ecuadorian microfinance institution. Potentially, even if you're not deploying it around Asia, from a Cambodian bank, right? Georgia, I think, is not so bad. Armenia is not so bad. Singapore, obviously, is well reputed by everybody in the world. And so, if you're looking to dollar cost average money in, you probably want to be with a bank that's larger, that's in a better jurisdiction, that perhaps has built-in investment services where you can just move the money over within your own account, or where you can easily and affordably wire it and no one's going to ask you too many questions like, why are you banking in Ecuador? Why is this money coming from Ecuador? So for long-term deposits of just if you want the lifetime emergency fund, maybe you put together a pool where you have some money in Singapore, some money in more exotic places that offer higher rates, maybe some's in US dollars, some's in foreign currencies that are more exotic. A lot of these emerging market currencies are just trash, and they just go down every year. So the ones that we've talked about are ones that either are basically tied to the US dollar or have done very well against the US dollar, like the Dram and the Lari. The Lari, not so much in the last 5 years, but more recently has been a good performer. And so, do I want to just keep money in the bank and just have an income coming in every year because I'm just never going to spend that money? Then I'm going to have a pool. If I'm just looking to dollar cost average or wait for my next opportunity, I'm going to look at a place like a Singapore where they're paying an attractive rate, great conditions, great service. I feel comfortable having large amounts of money there. You decide how much money you're comfortable having there, but that's one way you can basically take advantage of higher rates in other countries. I don't think you're going to get those rates in the United States, for example, and so you can move your US dollars there and get paid more while you wait.